We are going to turn to Dr. Maria Armstrong to continue the conversation. But before we do so, if you like what you hear and want to learn more, then feel free to subscribe below or tune in next week, Thursday at 7 p.m. We thank you for joining.
So Amanda, we were just talking about the work that you're so most proud of in this past year, and how it really brings together the state work as well as Latinos for education and the priorities around that. One, of course, is being the teacher diversity and some legislation that you were able to help champion on this. Yes. So what does that look like? What kind of doors are going to be open for folks to be able to carve out that path so that we can have communities open up for them to be in the education sector?
Yes. So what we know through the research and what's been, I think, cataloged for a very long time in our state, the licensure exam is a big barrier. And I think that is consistent across states where that's a requirement. And so we were, for many years, many groups saying this is inequitable, and knowing that licensure exam, both financially and is a barrier, especially if you have to take it multiple times to pass it. It became a barrier for too many prospective teachers of color. And then just the test itself, the exam itself, was something that created a barrier, in particular for folks whose first language may not have been English growing up. So it's been widely recognized that the licensure exam is a big barrier. So that's one area that we're saying there must be policy to explore alternative methods to licensure in terms of what the exam is actually assessing, and there needs to be multiple assessments for and different ways of looking at assessing for licensure requirements. So that's a big one. The state is piloting an effort, but I think what we've seen even most recently is because there were emergency waivers granted to a high percentage of people of color to teach during the pandemic. And we've seen just a really interesting increase in people of color who are now teaching, who were able to teach with that emergency waiver. And that is being seen as a potential sort of focus group almost to say, what did we learn from that? And how are these teachers faring? And what can we learn from these emergency waivers that have allowed for a 25% increase of those teachers to be people of color? And how can we learn from that to apply toward this issue of licensure and looking at different ways to assess whether a teacher is effective or prospective teacher can be effective? So I think that's a really interesting one. We are pushing forward legislation on that front. And then within the bill, there's a section on data transparency. Right now, we aren't seeing breakdowns by demographic in terms of different data sets that will help us know more about where the biggest gaps and with who, whether it's African American or Latinos in the profession, both in recruitment and retention numbers. So we're really interested in seeing that breakdown and making sure that there's data transparency that we can monitor our progress with. So that's another big one. I think the one that's most exciting to me is identifying or requesting budget allocations in the state budget to go toward teacher pathways through dual enrollment programs or early college programs, I should say. So in Massachusetts right now, the early college programs focus primarily on STEM careers. And as you, I'm sure, know, the early college pathways are seeing a lot of success. They are supporting more kids of color, more Latinos and African Americans going to college because they can get many credits while they're in high school. And it prepares them to both go to college as well as not be as financially beholden. And so we've identified that it could be a tremendous opportunity to have a very specific teacher pathway that would be funded and that many more of our districts could take advantage of to increase the pipeline of educators of color in Massachusetts. So these are the sort of the top areas of policy that our bill will address.
That's awesome. You know, you're looking at a person who went from the private industry sector into education because of those times of needs, emergencies, and you know, I was put on a temporary credential and had to do things backwards. And then that was my second career, you know, becoming a teacher, and was in the classroom for, you know, over 10 years. But, you know, I think about how it takes something as catastrophic as this to be able to look in what we've been able to do and know it's proven to, you know, work for many when there have been teacher shortages for a long time, but the money has never been there to shore that up. Why? Because we want to use that same nickel and split it 5 different ways to address 10 different needs. And so I really appreciate the fact that in this bill that there's going to be a separate bucket, if you will, that is a jobs initiative.
That's right.
It's a jobs initiative.
That's right.
And stop coupling education needs for kids with jobs.
That's
Funding
right.
for business and jobs needs to be its own. And so then that way they can be paid the way they need to be paid as in any other sector. That way the funds for education can trickle to kids and the needs that they have. So I really appreciate the work that y'all are doing there. The other thing I want to talk about real quick is the teacher diversity piece. You know, the different pathways is always been an interesting concept. And I've been, you know, I sit on some coalitions out here in DC too, and I know that I'll use the platform as often as I can to be able to say, until you address the student debt issue, you're not going to find kids that I mean, I was thinking just for myself, have to work to go to school. And then when you do get into education, you're still working and you're trying to further your education. Because like I said, I had to do things backwards. But then what's at the end of that tunnel? That big bright light is a train. It is not the end. It is a student loan that is so huge. You start to, you know, how do you go and tell kids, yeah, get into education, keep going. You got to, you know, get your learnings. But at the end of that, you're going to be saddled with such a price tag that somehow we've got to marry the fact that if you want to change and you really want to open up that gate especially for kids of color to start teaching in their own communities, they cannot have waiting for them a mountain of debt.
Yeah,
so
that's so true. I mean, I'm on a community college board as well here locally, and I don't know what
for community
you think.
colleges.
Well,
Thank
right.
God for community colleges.
Yeah,
I went to every single community college within a 100-mile radius in San Diego. There's a transcript in every one with my name on it.
Well,
Thank God for them.
I'm a product as well of community college, and it also was super helpful. So I mean, this is more a question. I don't know that I have the expertise to answer it, but I have had a lot of wonderings around the viability of free community college because so many of our Black and Brown young people and adults go to community college, and what a lift that would be to offer pathways through community college. And so I am seeing some promise around the actual pathways component. You are seeing community colleges offering pathways to teaching, certainly early education, and then also teaching pathways and partnerships with four-year institutions to continue your education. And that's really exciting. But I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. This issue of our being strapped with loans is a deterrent for kids. And what you're hearing now is kids are delaying or not going to college because they have to work, and because of the financial circumstances of too many Americans right now, we are dealing with kids that can't go to college. They can't afford it, and they can't. And so I think that's a serious issue you pose, and a question that you pose that does have serious long-term consequences for Latino students and young people in our country. So I'm as part of our sort of national principles of priorities that we have at Latinos for Education, and what we want to advocate for nationally is certainly a focus on college access and completion. So we know that that's super critical. We're also advocating for pre-K, universal pre-K, because of how early the gaps start for kids, right? And it's at preschool. So we have to address these issues at all ends and throughout the continuum. So it's clearly a really challenging job, and where do you start? But I appreciate your comments on the student debt and that being a massive barrier.
Yeah, and I bring that up because, I mentioned about it from a federal level, right?
Yeah.
You talk extensively about from a state level and from the organizational level of your nonprofit, but from a federal level, what will be, you think, the most anticipated shift in support or guidance based on what we talked about? The things that we've come to know and learn from. Do you see that the feds need to start making some kind of shift or provide guidance now for states with maybe a little more careful eye? And what would that look like? What do you think that would entail?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not going to proclaim expertise in this realm, but I'll give you my opinion and some things that I see being pointed to in the short term relative to COVID response, which I think will trickle down to the states, because we're already seeing it happen with the states in terms of planning for summer learning, for example. So
it all rolls downhill.
That's right. As they say, yes. For better or for worse. So that's so I think, in the short term, seeing the federal government and the Secretary of Education supporting again summer school and ways in which we can support our kids who may have may be behind in their learning. And again, I think that's yet another conversation about learning loss and what is it. And so I don't know about sort of the semantics of that, like what are we really talking about? But I hope we see funds going to that to support in academics, but more importantly, I hope we see more supports going to mental health and to creating environments for our kids to reconnect, to be supported through the trauma of the impact of COVID. Our low-income communities, I'm glad we're starting to see that more funding will go to those districts where the need is highest. That is essential. And that all starts with the federal government and the funding that's just been signed on. Yep. So I'm glad to see all that. And I think that will be really helpful. I think I think that the mental health piece and helping our kids through this is what should be prioritized. That really has surfaced as really the most challenging for our students and families, and moving through that experience. So I hope to see that happen. And then in the longer term, like I said, I mean, I already kind of went over it, but I think from a federal education perspective, on what I've heard the secretary talk about, and also with our national principles that we rolled out, the president, when he was president-elect, had adopted the principles and confirmed to address these areas within his first 100 days of the presidency. And I already mentioned these, but early childhood access, the diverse educator workforce, and college access and completion. So those are sort of three areas that I'm hopeful that there will be some extra emphasis and federal funding and support to support our families in all those ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you, we have many intersecting points within your nonprofit and within ALAS.
Yeah.
And so it'd be great if we could, maybe at some point get together and say, okay, you know what, these two we need to come together on.
Yeah.
It's a great tagline to say we're stronger together. It's another far more powerful act when it happens. So I invite you to be at the table, and please know that we're here to be at your table as well. And with that, I just want to say thank you so much for spending a little bit of your time and sharing all the great work that's been going on with Latinos in education. A true partner.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey there, and don't forget, if you like what you hear and want to gain some more insight into what school districts are facing now, then tune in every Thursday at 7 p.m. or subscribe below. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great night.